The rain pelted my windshield in heavy, unrelenting sheets, blurring the edges of the highway as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My knuckles were pale against the leather, a stark contrast to the gray haze outside. I had been driving for 6 hours already, and there were still 3 more to go. But what was a bit of rain and arthritis compared to the look on Charlotte's face when I walked through that door? The passenger seat cradled a cake carrier, cushioned by 2 pillows to prevent it from sliding with each turn. It wasn't just any cake, it was her cake. 3 layers of carrot cake, cream cheese frosting spread thickly between each tier, and tiny marzipan carrots delicately placed on top. I had shaped each one with my hands, pinching the orange marzipan just right, adding the green stems with a toothpick. My fingers don't bend like they used to, but I'd managed. I always managed. Charlotte had loved carrot cake since she was 7, declaring it her favorite at her birthday party, much to the confusion of her chocolate-obsessed friends. It became tradition. Year after year, no matter where she was, I would bake her that cake. This year, it had taken me 2 days to finish. But I had done it, even though my knees screamed at me each time I climbed the stairs, even though the rain forecast threatened to keep me home. Theda, my neighbor of 30 years, had waved me off from her side of the hedge, concern evident in her eyes. "You're really driving all that way alone, Maggie?" she had asked, clutching her gardening shears like they might offer protection. "It's not the Oregon Trail, Theda," I had replied, tucking the cake carrier securely in the trunk. "Just a bit of rain, and I'm taking the interstate." "It's your knees I'm worried about, not the weather," she muttered. But I waved her off with a laugh. My knees and I had an understanding. I ignored their protests, and they carried me where I needed to go. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it grew worse as I approached the state line, thick drops smearing across the glass, my wipers working overtime. The radio crackled softly, old tunes that Harold and I used to dance to in the kitchen. I could almost see him there, hands on my waist, spinning me around to Moon River, his laugh rich and deep. He'd been gone 12 years, but sometimes I still swore I could hear his voice in the rain. I reached Ridgewood just past 3 in the afternoon. The storm had not let up, and my hands ached from the strain of holding the wheel for so long. Charlotte's house, a grand Tudor on the end of a cul-de-sac, stood tall and imposing, its manicured lawn untouched by the rain. I parked across the street, not in their driveway. I wanted it to be a surprise. The cake was still intact, nestled safely in its carrier. I lifted it gently, cradling it against my chest as I made my way to the front door, the rain biting at my cheeks. I didn't bother with the doorbell. I knew it would be unlocked. It always was when they were expecting company. Birthday company, just not me. The house was warm, the smell of rosemary and garlic wafting from the kitchen. I paused just inside the entryway, taking a moment to shake off the rain and catch my breath. My sensible shoes dripped onto the polished hardwood, a tiny rebellion against the pristine order of their foyer. I was about to call out when I heard them. "God, I hope she crashes." Charlotte's voice drifted from the kitchen, clear as day. My heart stopped, the cake heavy in my arms. A laugh, deep and familiar. "Daniel." "Then we wouldn't have to deal with her constant calls," he replied, his tone light, easy. "Or at least get lost," Charlotte continued, chuckling. "Give us a weekend. Without the guilt trips." I felt my breath catch, sharp and sudden. I hadn't moved. I couldn't. My feet seemed to have rooted themselves to the hardwood. The cake, that damn cake, felt like lead in my hands. My daughter, my only child. The one I had nursed through chicken pox, driven to dance recitals, stayed up late with when Harold was deployed. Wished I would crash. My knees finally gave way, just a little. I steadied myself against the console table, feeling its sharp edge dig into my palm. My breath came in shallow bursts. I wanted to turn around, walk out, drive the 9 hours back to Ridgewood, and pretend this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But I couldn't. Not anymore. I stepped forward, placed the cake carrier on the kitchen counter, gently, so it wouldn't slide. There would be no birthday song, no candles, no surprise, just a cake and an empty space where a mother should have been. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked back into the rain, the door clicking shut behind me. The storm swallowed the sound of my footsteps, and for once, I was grateful for the rain that masked my tears. The drive back was quieter. No radio, no thoughts of surprises or happy birthdays, just the rhythm of the wipers and the thrum of the rain against the roof. In that silence, clarity came. It was more painful than the arthritis, sharper than the ache in my hands. I had been enabling their life, propping up their luxuries with my guarantees, my credit, my good name. I was not their mother. I was their safety net. But not anymore. Not anymore. The rain followed me back to Ridgewood, a constant whisper against my windshield, like it knew my secrets and was trying to cleanse them away. I pulled into my driveway, just after midnight, the house dark and still. The porch light flickered as I turned the key, casting long shadows across the wet concrete. Theda had left it on for me, like she always did when I was out late. Her silhouette was visible through her living room curtains, pacing back and forth, no doubt waiting for me to get home safely. I waved to her before stepping inside, the warmth of the house pressing against me like a quilt fresh from the dryer. I stood there for a moment, dripping rain onto the hardwood, just breathing. Home. It still smelled faintly of Harold's aftershave and the lavender sachets I kept in the closets. I leaned against the door, letting the tension seep out of my bones, but the quiet didn't soothe me like it used to. I moved to the kitchen, flipping on the light and watching it spill across the countertops. My hand shook as I reached for the kettle, filling it with water and setting it on the stove. A cup of tea would help me think. It always had. But as I waited for it to boil, the memories came, uninvited, like ghosts pressing their hands against frosted glass. Charlotte at 8, running into the kitchen with muddy shoes, laughing as I chased her out. "You're tracking dirt everywhere." I had scolded, but she just laughed, spinning in circles on the tile, leaving footprints like faded memories. Charlotte at 16, standing in the hallway in her prom dress, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Mom, what do you think?" she'd asked, twirling for me. My eyes had misted then, the same way they misted now. Charlotte at 25, clutching Daniel's hand, talking about their dream house. "It's just a bit out of reach," she'd said, her voice soft and pleading. "The bank said we just need a co-signer, someone reliable. Mom, it would mean the world to us. I had signed. Of course I had signed. I would have given her the moon if she'd asked for it." The kettle whistled, shrill and sharp, snapping me back to the present. I poured the steaming water over a tea bag and sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug, letting its warmth seep into my palms. My eyes drifted to the drawer in the hallway, the one where I kept all the paperwork, the guarantees, the credit card statements, the bank notices. My hands shook as I pulled the drawer open, the metal gliding smoothly, revealing the stacks of neatly filed envelopes, each one labeled in my handwriting. Mortgage, credit cards, car loan. I pulled them out one by one, spreading them across the table like puzzle pieces. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I found it. Charlotte and Daniel's names, neatly printed alongside mine. Co-signer, guarantor. A safety net woven so tightly, they hadn't even noticed when they began to bounce without fear of falling. 4 credit cards, each with a limit, stretching beyond reason. Home renovations, the beach house down payment, vacations to places I'd only seen on postcards. the Maldives, Bora Bora, Monaco. I had seen the photos on Facebook. Charlotte smiling, drink in hand, Daniel with his arm draped around her, waves crashing behind them. I had pressed like on everyone, heart aching with the knowledge that I hadn't been invited, but relieved. They were happy. I didn't know I was paying for it. A car loan. 2019 BMW X5. Not the Honda she used to drive, the one I had co-signed when she first got her license. This was new. Luxury. The kind of car I wouldn't dare drive for fear of scratching. The paint. The final blow came when I found the home equity loan. $40,000, taken out just 2 years ago. I stared at the statement, the numbers blurring together, my breath coming in sharp bursts. I didn't remember signing for this, but I had. There it was. My name, scrawled in ink, next to Charlotte's. I could hear her voice, smooth and practiced. It's just a little bit, Mom, just to fix up the house. You know how it is. Real estate's an investment. Real estate. An investment. My mind spun. I had been an investor, all right. Not in property, but in illusions. I looked at the clock. It was just past 3 a.m., but I reached for the phone anyway, dialing the number without hesitation. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Whoever this is, you better have a good reason for calling at this hour. Eleanor grumbled. Elle, I said, my voice cracking. I need you. There was a pause. Maggie? Her tone softened instantly. What happened? I need to change my will. I need to remove myself from everything. Eleanor was silent for a moment, and then her voice came steady and sure. Okay. I'll be over first thing in the morning. And Maggie? Yes? You did the right thing calling me. We're going to fix this. I hung up, my hands still trembling. I glanced back at the mountain of papers spread across my kitchen table. My entire financial life, my sacrifices, my blind spots, laid bare. I wasn't their mother. I was their wallet, their safety net, their insurance policy. But not anymore. Not anymore. The office smelled like leather and old wood, a scent that brought me back to Harold's study, where he used to sit with his books and a glass of whiskey, humming some long-forgotten tune. Eleanor's law office hadn't changed in the 20 years I'd been coming here. The same heavy oak desk, the same shelves lined with law books whose spines were cracked from constant use. Eleanor herself sat behind that desk, her glasses perched on her nose, pen in hand, her flame-red hair pulled back in a severe bun that defied gravity. Are you sure about this, Maggie? She asked, her eyes sharp behind those thick lenses. She had always been blunt, never one to mince words. Maybe that was why I trusted her. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it settle in my bones. I am. Eleanor leaned back, tapping, the end of her pen on the desk. Leaving everything to the Ridgewood Women's Shelter is quite a statement. It's the right one, I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. They took care of me after Harold passed. I volunteered. There for years I've seen what good they do. That's where the money will make a difference. She raised an eyebrow. And Charlotte? I swallowed hard, my fingers curling around the edges of my purse. I'll leave her my recipe box and my journals. She can read about the mother. She discarded. Maybe she'll understand one day. Eleanor's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Deliciously poetic, Maggie. A bit ruthless, but I can't say I disapprove. She slid a folder across the desk. We'll draft it up. I'll need your signature in a few spots. I picked up the pen, my hand steady. I expected them to shake, to hesitate, but they didn't. The ink flowed smoothly, my name curling in practiced strokes at the bottom of each page. With every signature, I felt the weight lift just a little bit more. I looked up at Eleanor when I finished. I want to go further. She tilted her head. Further? I want to remove myself from everything. The loans, the credit cards, the mortgage, all of it. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her fingers steepling beneath her chin. You do understand what that will mean, don't you? Charlotte and Daniel are entirely dependent on those guarantees. Their credit, their mortgage, their lifestyle. It's all tethered to your name. I straightened my spine, feeling the old ache flare up, but I ignored it. Yes, I understand. I'm not their safety net anymore. A slow smile crept across Eleanor's face. Well, I've waited 20 years to hear you say that. Let's get started. We spent the next 2 hours unraveling the tangled web of signatures and cosigns that I had allowed to accumulate over the years. Eleanor was merciless, efficient, and unyielding as she drafted letters to banks and creditors, revoking my guarantees, retracting my involvement. I signed my name more times than I could count, my wrist aching by the time we finished. When we were done, she set her pen down and looked at me with something close to admiration. You realize this will send shockwaves, right? Mortgage payments will adjust. Credit cards will be frozen. Their entire financial structure is going to collapse. I met her gaze head on. Good. Her smile widened. All right, Maggie. Let's go make it official. We walked the 3 blocks to Ridgewood First National, the rain having finally cleared, leaving the sidewalks slick and shimmering under the afternoon sun. I felt lighter, almost buoyant as I stepped through the doors. The teller smiled politely, her eyes flicking to Eleanor with recognition. Ms. Caldwell, a pleasure as always. What can I do for you today? We'd like to close some accounts and remove Mrs. Whitmore's guarantees on several loans and credit lines. Eleanor's voice was crisp and professional, her presence a shield I hadn't realized I needed. The teller blinked, glancing at me for confirmation. All of them? She asked, her voice cautious. I nodded, a small smile breaking free. All of them. It took an hour, maybe more, but by the time I signed the final line and handed over the pen, I felt the kind of relief you read about in novels. The kind that starts in your chest and radiates out to your fingertips. Eleanor patted my arm as we walked back to her office. How do you feel? She asked. Free, I replied simply. And for the first time in years, I actually meant it. I was home before Charlotte called. I had just finished setting the kettle back on the stove when my phone buzzed on the counter, her name flashing across the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered. Mom? Her voice was tight, like she was holding her breath. Yes, dear? What did you do? Her voice cracked, slipping from controlled to frantic. Our credit cards just stopped working. Daniel is on the phone with the bank right now, and they're saying you... I did. I interrupted, my voice calm, steady. I'm not your guarantor anymore. Mom, you can't just... What are we supposed to do? That's for you and Daniel to figure out. I leaned against the counter, the weight of years of expectation sliding off me like water. I'm done, Charlotte. I've done enough. There was a long silence, the kind that stretches thin and fragile. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. Why are you doing this? I closed my eyes, picturing her kitchen, the rosemary and garlic, the laughter, the casual cruelty. Because I finally realized what I'm worth. You're punishing us. No, I said, my voice clear. I'm setting myself free. I hung up before she could respond, the quiet of my kitchen settling around me like a soft blanket. I reached for the kettle, the water now boiling, and poured it over the waiting tea bag. Steam curled up into the air, swirling and dancing, and I watched it disappear. For the first time in years, I took a sip, and it didn't taste like regret. The first call came just after breakfast. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the morning sunlight filtering through the lace curtains, turning the room golden and warm. A plate of toast sat untouched beside my cup of Earl Grey, steam rising in delicate wisps. My knees ached, the way they always did after a rain, but I'd grown accustomed to the stiffness. It was a small price to pay for independence. The phone buzzed sharply against the wood, shattering the peace. I glanced at the screen. Charlotte. I didn't answer. The second call came a minute later, and the third. By the fourth, I picked up, more out of curiosity than obligation. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Mom." Her voice was sharp, strained, the kind of tone you use when you're clinging to control. "What have you done?" I leaned back in my chair, fingers curled around my teacup. "I'm not sure what." "You mean, oh, don't you dare play coy with me," she snapped, the mask slipping. "Our credit cards have been frozen. The mortgage company called Daniel this morning. They're saying the terms are being revised." "Yes," I replied, taking a sip of my tea. It was still hot, fragrant with bergamot. "I suppose they would." Her breath came in shallow bursts, like she was pacing. I could picture her in that grand kitchen of hers, the one I helped finance. Marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, things I had only seen in magazines before she moved into that house. She used to call it her dream kitchen. I guess I was the one who paid for her dreams. "You can't do this," she shouted, voice cracking. "This is our life. You're ruining everything." I took another sip. "I'm not ruining anything. I'm simply stepping back. Don't give me that." Her voice grew sharper. "This is vindictive. You're punishing us because you're angry. That's what this is. Spiteful and cruel." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. They felt like echoes, hollow and practiced. "I'm not punishing you, Charlotte," I said finally. "I'm just choosing not to be used anymore." "Used?" she spat. "We're family. That's what family does. They help each other." I stared out the window, watching the birds flit between the branches of the old maple tree Harold had planted the year Charlotte was born. It had grown tall and strong, roots stretching deep into the earth. "Help isn't the word I'd use," I murmured, almost to myself. "Mom, listen." Her voice softened, slipping into that sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Let's not do anything drastic, okay? Let me come over. We'll talk this out. You can't just abandon us like this." Abandon. A word heavy with accusation. It made my grip on the cup tighten. I thought of the last few Christmases spent alone, the phone calls cut short, with excuses, the photos of beach vacations and summer homes that I only saw through Facebook posts. Was that what she considered family? I set the cup down gently, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. "I'm not abandoning you, Charlotte. I'm just no longer financing you." "Mom," her voice cracked, softening to a whisper. "You're my mother? How can you do this to me?" "How could you do this to me?" I replied, my voice steady. The silence stretched, brittle and sharp. Finally, she spoke, her voice harder now. "You're going to regret this." "No, I don't think I will." I ended the call before she could respond. The letters started coming 2 days later. They were dropped through the mail slot, the envelopes heavy and thick, Charlotte's handwriting precise and controlled. I didn't open them right away. I left them on the side table by the door, neatly, stacked, a testament to her persistence. By the end of the week, there were 6. On Sunday, I poured myself a cup of coffee, pulled the stack into my lap, and began to read. The first one was pleading. "Mom, you have to understand. This isn't just about money. It's about security. It's about the life we've built. You can't just take that away." The second was manipulative. "You always told me you'd take care of me. You promised. Was that all a lie?" The third was cruel. "I hope you're happy, sitting in that dusty old house alone. You never wanted me to have more than you." That's what this is really about. Jealousy. The fourth, fifth, and sixth were variations of the same. Guilt, manipulation, desperation. I read each one slowly, letting the words sink in, but I didn't feel what I thought I would. No pain, no regret. Just a hollow kind of sadness for what was lost long before I chose to step back. That afternoon, Clara came by with a fresh peach pie, still warm from the oven. She bustled into the kitchen without knocking, setting the pie down on the counter with a flourish. "You look like you could use some company," she said, already reaching for the kettle. I watched her fill the teapot, the kitchen brightening just a little with her presence. Clara had been my neighbor for 30 years, ever since she moved in after her divorce. She'd helped me plant my garden, watched Charlotte grow up, brought me casseroles when Harold died. She was more family than my own blood these days. I gestured to the stack of letters on the counter. "They've started arriving." Clara glanced at them, her mouth tightening. "I'm surprised it took this long. Entitlement like that doesn't go away quietly." I laughed, sharp and sudden. "No, I suppose it doesn't." She poured us both a cup of tea and handed me a slice of pie. "How are you holding up?" Took a bite, the taste of fresh peaches and cinnamon blooming across my tongue. "Better than I thought I would," I admitted. "I expected, I don't know, guilt, grief, but I don't feel that. I feel lighter." Clara raised her cup in a mock toast. "That's what freedom feels like, Maggie." I met her gaze, and for the first time in years, I believed her. That evening, when the phone rang again and Charlotte's name flashed on the screen, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't need to hear the desperation, the bargaining, the blame. I'd heard it all before, in different ways, in different forms, but the words were always the same. Instead, I curled up on the sofa with a quilt my mother had made, the kind of heavy wool that smells faintly of cedar and memories. I opened a book I hadn't read since Harold died, my fingers slipping over the worn edges of the pages. The rain began to patter against the windows, soft and rhythmic, a lullaby to old wounds finally beginning to heal. The phone buzzed again, insistent and shrill, but I ignored it. I had already answered enough. The Ridgewood Women's Shelter sat, on the corner of Maple and Fifth, tucked between a community library and an old hardware store that hadn't changed since the 70s. It was modest but welcoming. Red brick walls covered in ivy, windows decorated with handmade curtains sewn by the residents. I had volunteered there on and off for years after Harold died, but lately, I found myself going more often. The director, Mary Ann, greeted me warmly as I walked in one rainy Tuesday morning. "Maggie? Twice in 1 week? We're being spoiled," she said with a grin, her hands dusted with flour from the morning's baking class. I shrugged off my coat and hung it on the peg by the door. "I figured you could use an extra set of hands." Her eyes softened. "We always can." I spent the morning sorting donations, canned goods, winter coats, stacks of children's books. The shelter bustled with quiet energy. Women moved through the halls with purpose, some chatting in small groups, others sitting quietly with mugs of tea cradled in their hands. I saw strength there, the kind you don't recognize until you're forced to find it. During lunch, I sat with Rosa, a mother of 2 who had left an abusive marriage 6 months ago. She spooned soup into her son's bowl with the gentle care of someone who knew what it meant to lose and start again. "You're here a lot more now," she said, glancing up at me with dark, curious eyes. I nodded, stirring my tea. "I guess I realized I needed to be." She smiled, a real one that reached her eyes. "It's good. Helps to have something to do, something that's yours." Her words stayed with me long after I left the shelter that afternoon. That evening, I pulled out Harold's old gardening gloves from the back of the closet, dusted them off, and stepped out into the backyard. The garden had been neglected, weeds stretching tall and bold where my roses used to bloom. I knelt down, wincing as my knees creaked in protest, and began pulling up the weeds, roots and all. My hands worked methodically, the rhythm of it soothing. I could almost hear Harold's voice, teasing me for leaving it so long. A garden's like a good friendship, Maggie. Ignore it, and it'll wither. I smiled at the memory, brushing the dirt from my gloves. The soil was rich, dark, and smelled like new beginnings. I made a list of things I wanted to plant. Blueberries, tomatoes, maybe some daisies along the fence line. Plants that would take root, flourish, and remind me that growth was still possible, even now. Over the next few weeks, my days took on a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. Mornings at the women's shelter, sorting donations, helping with classes, listening as the women shared their stories of betrayal, hope, and resilience. They were young, old, mothers, daughters, but all of them fighters in their own way. I saw pieces of myself in their eyes, an ache I knew too well. Afternoons were for my garden. I dug up the old beds, turned the soil, planted rows of tomatoes and herbs, and staked out a corner for blueberries. Clara came over one Saturday with a basket of tulip bulbs. "Thought these might brighten the place up," she said, handing them over with a smile. We planted them side by side, her humming some old folk tune as we worked. When we finished, we sat on the porch, hands dirty and knees aching, sipping lemonade she'd brought in a mason jar. "You're different lately," she said, tipping her hat back to look at me. "Different how?" "Lighter," she replied, her eyes softening. "Like you finally put down something heavy." I thought about it, letting her words settle. "Maybe I did." She reached over, patting my hand. "It looks good on you." 2 weeks later, I threw a small gathering at my house, just a handful of friends, Clara, Marianne, and a few women from the shelter. I set up the backyard with folding chairs and mismatched cushions, strung up fairy lights along the fence, and served iced tea and finger sandwiches. Clara brought a peach cobbler, still warm from the oven, and Marianne came with a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked on her morning walk. We sat in the shade of the maple tree, its branches heavy with summer leaves. The garden bloomed around us, fresh shoots of green poking up through the soil, delicate buds beginning to open. There was laughter, real and unrestrained, and I realized I hadn't heard that kind of joy in my own home for a long time. Marianne raised her glass of iced tea, her eyes twinkling. "To Maggie," she said, voice steady and proud, "for teaching us that it's never too late to start again." The others echoed the toast, their glasses clinking together, the sound bright and full of promise. I felt my throat tighten, the words catching in my chest. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice cracking just a little. We stayed out there until the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the garden in shades of amber and gold. The lights flickered on as dusk settled, casting a warm glow across our faces. I watched the women around me, strong, resilient, unbreakable in ways I hadn't understood before. I saw bits of myself in them, fragments of hope and pain stitched together with determination. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for a phone call or an apology. I wasn't standing by for a holiday invitation or a last-minute plea for money. I was living, right here, in my own space, surrounded by people who valued me, not for what I could give, but for who I was. As the stars began to peek through the twilight, I walked back to the garden, my hands brushing over the fresh leaves, the new life sprouting from the soil. I knew it would take time, seasons even, but they would grow, stretching toward the sun, roots sinking deep. So would I. The phone rang at precisely 7:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just settled into my chair with a blanket draped over my legs, a cup of chamomile tea steaming on the side table. Outside, the evening had settled in, the crickets humming their lullaby under the stars. I almost didn't pick up. My hands were wrapped around my teacup, and the last thing I wanted was another call from Charlotte or Daniel, clawing for financial salvation. But the number was unfamiliar, and curiosity got the best of me. "Hello?" There was a pause, then a voice. Soft, careful. "Mrs. Whitmore?" "Yes." "This is Dr. Warren from Ridgewood Memorial Hospital. I have your daughter Charlotte here. She's asked me to call you." My breath caught, the warmth of the tea turning to ice in my hands. "Is she all right?" "She experienced some bleeding," Dr. Warren replied, his voice professional but gentle. "We've run some tests, and everything looks stable, but we're keeping her overnight for observation. Her husband is traveling for work, and she asked if you would come." I gripped the phone tighter. "She asked for me?" "Yes," he said softly. "She also asked me to tell you she's sorry, but only if you meant what you wrote in your card." I stared at the wall, the room narrowing around me. My card, the one I'd sent her after I found out she was pregnant. I'd written it late at night, sitting at this very table, the words spilling out before I could second-guess them. "I've heard your news. A child changes everything. Sometimes by their presence, sometimes by their absence. I wish you the wisdom to value what matters most. If you ever want to discuss a relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial entanglement, my door remains open, with love." I'd sent it without expectation, just an olive branch cast into the wind, knowing full well it might never take root, but now she was asking for me. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said, already reaching for my coat. The drive to Ridgewood Memorial was quiet, the streets empty, save for the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. My hands were steady on the wheel, my heart a drumbeat that I couldn't quiet. I didn't know what to expect when I walked through those hospital doors. Anger, manipulation, more of the same. But I was prepared. I had to be. I found her on the 4th floor, room 412. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and lemon cleaner, sterile and sharp. Her door was ajar, light spilling into the hallway, and I paused just outside, collecting my breath. Finally, I stepped in. Charlotte looked small in that bed, the sheets pulled up to her waist, her hair a tangled mess around her pale face. Her hands were folded over the slight swell of her stomach, fingers brushing absently against the fabric of her gown. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears, real ones this time, not the crocodile kind. "You came," she whispered, her voice cracking. I stepped forward, pulling the chair beside her bed. "You asked." Her lip trembled, and she turned her face away for a moment, blinking back tears. When she looked back, her eyes were red, but clearer than I'd seen them in years. I didn't think you would." I swallowed hard, fingers lacing together in my lap. "I wasn't sure I would either." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the soft beep of machines and muffled footsteps in the hallway, the only sounds between us. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry." The words landed between us, raw and heavy. I searched her face, looking for the familiar signs, tight lips, darting eyes, the tells that usually accompanied her apologies. But they weren't there. She just looked tired and sincere. "I've been seeing a therapist," she continued, her hands wringing in her lap, "since the beach house fell through, and all the things you did. I was angry at first. But then she started asking me questions. About you. About us. About why I felt so entitled." My breath caught. I hadn't expected her to say that. Not in a million years. She made me think about things differently, she said, her voice softening, like how you paid for everything, how you signed every dotted line because I asked you to, how I never considered that it might hurt you to always be a bank. Her eyes met mine, glossy with tears. I never thought about you as a person, just as, I don't know, as a lifeline I always assumed would be there. I stared at her, the words swirling in my mind, settling in places I didn't think still existed. And now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her hands moved protectively over her stomach. Now I'm realizing that I was cruel, that I didn't appreciate what you did. Not really. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Mom. Something in me softened, cracked open just a bit. I reached across the hospital bed, my fingers brushing hers. She held on tight, her grip firm and desperate, like she was afraid I might let go. I'm here, I whispered. I'm still here. We stayed that way for a long time, neither of us saying much, the weight of old wounds easing just a little. When the nurse came to check her vitals, I slipped out to the waiting room, letting the emotions settle in the quiet. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail, addressed in Charlotte's handwriting. Inside was an ultrasound photo, glossy and black and white, a tiny figure curled up and fragile. Beneath it, she'd written in looping letters, "She has your nose." I stared at that photo for a long time, tracing the outline of the baby's profile with my fingertip, my breath catching in my throat. My granddaughter. I propped the photo up on the mantel next to Harold's picture, smiling softly. It wasn't a promise of perfection, but it was a start. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Not fixed, not perfect, but different. And for now, that was enough. The garden was alive with color that afternoon. Petunias, marigolds, and my newly planted blueberry bushes lined the edges of the lawn, their leaves shimmering under the soft touch of sunlight. Clara and I had spent the morning setting up folding chairs and laying out tablecloths dotted with tiny sunflowers. She fussed over the lemonade while I arranged plates of finger sandwiches and the peach cobbler she had brought, still warm from the oven. "You've outdone yourself, Maggie," Clara said, wiping her hands on her apron and stepping back to admire our work. "I half expect Martha Stewart to waltz through your gate any moment now." I laughed, the sound light and unburdened. I suppose even Martha would envy our homemade lemonade. We both laughed, the kind that leaves your ribs aching in the best way. It had been too long since my garden felt like a place of joy rather than solitude. Today, it was filled with life again, a symbol of what I had reclaimed. Not just my yard, but my heart. The guests began to arrive just after noon. Eleanor showed up first, dressed in her usual sharp pantsuit, heels clicking confidently against the brick path. She hugged me tightly, whispering, "You did it, Maggie. You really did it." Marianne followed, her hair tied back in a neat bun, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers from the shelter's garden. "From all of us," she said, pressing the flowers into my hands. "Thank you for everything you've done." I smiled, eyes misting. "You've given me more than you know, Marianne." The women from the shelter came next, Rosa with her 2 kids, Jen, who had just landed her first job at the bakery, and Maria, whose smile could light up the whole block. They filled the space with laughter, setting their plates down and settling into the chairs with the kind of ease that only comes from shared stories and hard-earned peace. We sat in the shade of the maple tree Harold had planted when Charlotte was born. Its branches stretched wide above us, heavy with summer leaves, casting dappled light across the garden. I poured lemonade and served slices of cobbler, listening as the women shared updates on their lives, their children, their jobs. When the conversation lulled, Clara raised her glass, her eyes bright with pride. "To Maggie," she said, her voice clear and steady. "To new beginnings, and knowing your own worth." The women raised their glasses in unison, the sunlight catching on the rims. "To Maggie," they echoed, and I felt my heart swell, warmth spreading through my chest. I looked around at the faces before me, strong, resilient women who had known pain and chosen hope instead. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling just a little. "I couldn't have done it without you all. I'm grateful." More than you know, Marianne leaned forward, her eyes soft. "You gave us hope, Maggie. Watching you take your life back, it showed us we could do it too." A hush fell over the table, heavy with meaning. I set my glass down, folding my hands in my lap. I used to think my worth was tied to what I could give, how much I could sacrifice. But I see now that setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It's kindness, to myself and to others. The women nodded, their eyes glistening with understanding. Clara reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, and I believed her. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn, the guests began to filter out, each hugging me tightly before they left. Marianne lingered a moment longer, pulling me aside. "We need you at the shelter, you know. The women look up to you." I nodded, a smile spreading across my face. "I'm not going anywhere, Marianne." When the last of them left, Clara stayed, behind, helping me clear the tables and fold up the chairs. We worked in silence, the kind that comes with old friendship, where words aren't always necessary. When we were done, she gave me one last hug before heading back to her own house, her voice trailing over her shoulder. "See you tomorrow for coffee." "Wouldn't miss it," I called back, waving as she disappeared through the gate. The garden was quiet again, but not empty. Not anymore. I walked over to the patch of soil I had tilled last week, the earth soft and dark. I knelt down, wincing, just a bit as my knees protested, and pulled a packet of seeds from my pocket. "Wildflowers," it said, in bright, cheerful letters. I tore the packet open, scattering the seeds into the soil, covering them with a layer of earth. I pressed my hands into the dirt, feeling the grit beneath my fingertips, the promise of something new. I sat back on my heels, wiping my hands on my jeans, and looked up at the sky. The clouds were light and scattered, the sun peeking through, in fractured rays. I thought of that rainstorm, the one that started all of this, how it had washed away the illusions I had clung to for so long, how it had carved out a path for something new to take root. I had thought it was an ending. I could see now it was a beginning. I stood slowly, brushing the dirt from my palms, and looked around the garden, my life. I had reclaimed it, not just from Charlotte and Daniel, but from the doubts and fears that had kept me tethered for so long. The seeds were planted. The soil was ready. All that was left was to wait to tend and to watch it grow, and I would.